Good morning from St. Bart's in Midtown Manhattan. My name is Peter Thompson. I serve as the vicar here, and it is my joy and delight to welcome you to the forum, where each week we have sacred conversations about the things that matter. And on this St. Bart's Day, we are celebrating our parish family. We are also welcoming the clergy of St. James Piccadilly in London. They were supposed to join us in person, but because of the death of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, they had to stay behind in London. But thanks to the wonders of technology, they are joining us for the forum this morning from the UK, and we are so very glad to welcome them. I am joined this morning by my colleagues, the Right Reverend Dean Wolfe, our rector, the Reverend Canon Stephanie Spellers, who is one of our assisting priests, and also serves as canon to the presiding bishop for reconciliation, creation, and evangelism, and the Reverend Meredith Ward, associate rector for pastoral care. And together, we are very happy to welcome the Reverend Lucy Winkett, who is the rector of St. James Piccadilly in London, the Reverend Dr. Ayla Lapine, who is associate rector, and the Reverend Dr. Mariama Efode Blees, who is assistant curate. And to say more about them and to fully welcome them to St. Bart's and to explain the partnership we are beginning to explore, I'll turn it over to our rector.
Well, it's just a joy to have you all with us. So we've been beginning a conversation about what it might be like to have a partnership with St. James. We have a lot, I think, that we share, both urban churches in prominent locations with historic buildings that are expensive to repair and to operate. We both share a passion for the expression of a progressive Christian faith and feature, I think, radical hospitality and inclusivity to all who would come through our doors. So we think that this is a wonderful kind of a relationship to get started, and we're looking forward to doing more and more with it as time goes by. Lucy, would you say anything more about that?
Thank you so much, Dean. First of all, could I wish you a very joyous St. Bart's Day? It's wonderful for us to be able somehow to connect with you on your patronal festival. So thank you so much for having us. And we're really sorry not to be there in person, but next year we would love to come at another time. That's it. We would love to explore, yes, what that would mean to have a link, a partnership. We're in the early days. We've had just one or two conversations, but we were excited to come this week. And when we come next year, perhaps we can talk some more. But exactly as you've said, Dean, I think we have a lot in common, and there's a lot that we can learn from you, I'm certain. And we'd love to keep talking.
Well, and vice versa. I think having served as a diocesan bishop and having attended Lambeth conferences, I came to really appreciate the value of those partnerships and relationships that kind of remind us that no matter our different circumstances, how much we have in common, and how good it is to have friends to support you in your work. So.
Thank you, Dean. So it has been quite a week for our London friends as they have helped shepherd their people and the people of London and around the world through the reaction to the Queen's death. And we've asked if each of them would be willing to share just a little bit of what it's like to minister in the midst of all of this. Lucy, I wonder if you would be willing to go first.
For sure. Thank you, Peter. Each of us will say a little bit about our own particular roles in how we've experienced the past week, but perhaps I can just say by way of introduction, we were actually in church last Thursday. Mariama and I were leading a service last Thursday when one of our vergers just came and said the palace had just announced that the Queen had died, and I was just about to preach the sermon. So it seemed right to me not to continue with the sermon, because the sermon was on another subject to do with the architecture of the church, in fact. So we said a prayer together and we said the blessing, and then the organist played some music. And what struck me at that moment was the reaction of the congregation, it was I would say quite a traditional congregation, but they were quite shocked and visibly shocked and visibly unanchored, and that's the word that I suppose I've come to understand this week, that while the Queen herself was clearly a person who'd lived for 96 years and had served for 70 years, this is not a surprising event, but it's a shocking event, and there's some kind of recalibration happening, or people are feeling a bit unanchored or untethered somehow. And so while this is the death of one person, which is an intensely personal happening, of course, for her and for her family, it's got this international significance. And in that sense, I would say it's no different, except in scale, from any other death, in a way, where there's multi-layers of reaction, many different types of reactions to this event. By no means is there a kind of homogenous, straightforward reaction, even from UK citizens to the death of the Queen, never mind an international set of reactions. So what's the role of the church in this? I think it's the role that churches often play in times of bereavement, or in times where an event makes a kind of jagged intervention into what we imagine as a kind of relatively stable and calm atmosphere, which is to be present, to be open, to be available, to be ready to pray, and to offer this space, this sacred space, to hold whatever those reactions are. So that happens on, again, different levels. So physically, we just open the church and wait and see what happens almost. People are here. Our congregation, fantastic volunteers have been here just to say hello to people as they've come in. The clergy have been around as well. We have got through hundreds and hundreds of candles. We're on our third condolence book. People have written the most heartfelt things in the condolence book. Again, not all exactly the same, but different reactions, but there's been a strong emotional reaction. And I think that our physical proximity to the events that are happening, we're very close to Buckingham Palace, we're very close to St. James's Palace, where the new king was proclaimed last Saturday, and we're very close to Westminster Hall. Our physical proximity means that people are kind of stumbling across us, wandering in, and our job is really to be there, to be present, and to be attentive to the different reactions, and also not to make assumptions about what people are bringing. Some people will come feeling that this has all been a very overblown reaction, and it doesn't relate to their own personal reaction. And they might want to come to find a place to escape from all the kerfuffle that they might be witnessing, from those kinds of reactions to people who feel personally that they have lost a member of their family. Along all of that spectrum, people are coming. But I suppose the way that I would characterize that is this sense of something has changed. No one is entirely certain what that is. But I mean, one of the things the Queen said in her life was that change is a constant, and that if you want things to remain stable or remain the same in some ways, then you have to be able to deal with quite a lot of change. So I think there's a sense that something fundamental has changed, but it's not entirely clear what the new situation is. So we're in a kind of understandably an in-between time. And there's been 10 days of national mourning, and the funeral will be tomorrow. And after that, I think we certainly as a church, while not denying the reactions of people, which will go on for a long time, I'm sure, in the spirit of the Queen, actually, we'll just get on with it after that. And we go back to our normal routine and our normal events, which have been suspended over this week as a mark of respect. I think that's probably all I can say by way of, I mean, there's lots to say, but by way of introduction, that's probably a good way to pass perhaps to Ayla, to ask Ayla to say a little bit about how we at St. James's have crafted our own response.
Thank you so much. And everything that Lucy has just shared, I think in different ways, all of us are recognizing and really contending with every encounter that we have, with every person that we meet. And just this morning, right after the Eucharist, there are a number of people that are just drifting in the courtyard. Some of you will be familiar with St. James's Piccadilly. It's set back slightly from the main road. So there's this beautiful courtyard. And so people are there all the time. And so people were gently drifting in to light a candle and sign the condolence book. And there was this lovely family who were there from Barcelona. And there was a young woman who had some flowers with her. And I said, "Are you on your way to Green Park? Because just a few steps from here is the main park that connects this bit of London to Buckingham Palace. And it's where people have been coming to lay what is now countless flowers and extraordinarily personal messages, lots of really beautiful drawings and notes from children, all sorts of things." And so she had these flowers and she said, "Yes, that's where we're going." And they said, "We've come all the way from Barcelona because we couldn't miss this. We need to be here." And no matter what people are coming for, what draws them to the church, to the park, to the now 5-mile long queue, which we'll hear more about when Mariama shares with us her experiences of being there in the last couple of days. I think a lot of the time people can't quite put into words how they're feeling and why they're participating in a certain kind of ritual, what the Queen's death has touched in them. And what we're finding in church is that there have been a number of people who, if they choose to say anything at all, are saying to us, members of the congregation and the clergy, that they have other things that are happening in their lives that they feel a need to share, or other things that might remind them of certain aspects of bereavement or of difficulty of any kind that are rising to the surface. And so to simply be a place that's open for whatever people bring has been a huge part of the ebb and flow of ministering in this part of London at this time. I think one of the surprising, lovely encounters for me was a few days ago when 2 Buddhist nuns came to pay their respects. And there is a Chinese Buddhist temple not too far from here, just about a 10-minute walk. And they'd never been into the church before. They were walking by and they said, "We just had to come in and we're so glad that you're open. And we've lit candles and we've acknowledged the holiness of this space. And I'm standing there in my cassock and they're standing there in their habits. And we just had a big old lovely conversation. And they were like, "You should come." And I was like, "Okay." And we sort of, exchanged details. And there was this wonderful little sparkle of interfaith possibility that emerged out of the deeper, sad reality of a nation who are in all of their different ways saying goodbye to an extraordinary monarch who's been with us for 96 years and who just celebrated her 70th anniversary, that Jubilee. And so I suppose there's also something about where were you when? And Lucy has shared what it was like for her and Mariama to be with this congregation on the 8th of September. Simultaneously, I would have been there, but I was down the street at the National Gallery hosting an event. And the event was looking at aspects of crossing borders and migration in relation to a painting by Orazio Gentileschi, which was made for the court of Charles I. And it's a painting of the finding of Moses. It was made to celebrate the birth of Charles II. And in the middle of this event, very similar to a verger letting Lucy know what had happened, someone from the AV team at the gallery came and spoke to the director, Gabriele Finaldi. And so he got up on stage, explained what had happened. And we had a moment. And the only thing, and it's a secular civic institution, it's a museum, the only thing that seemed right to do, and there were a number of priests in the audience, is for one of the priests to get up, hold silence, and say a prayer. And the prayer that he offered was based on the fruits of the Spirit from Galatians 5. And that's something that I think a lot of people are carrying with them when they describe the kind of world they want to see, and also the experience that they're having and what they are remembering about and what they're celebrating about the Queen those things that have to do with peace and faithfulness, generosity, that search for a sense of joy, even in the most extraordinary and most challenging of circumstances. And so I've really kind of held that with me in all the different ways that the congregation, the staff, and the clergy here are meeting the needs, and often very complex needs, of the people who are coming, as well as the people who are in and around our community. So that's probably enough from me. And I'd really love to hand over to Mariama, who can tell us more about her experience at this time.
Good morning, everyone. I'd probably like to preface what I'm going to say by stating that I was first an educator before I became a priest. So a lot of my relationship with God is about questioning God to find out what God's objectives are for the lesson he's about to impart on my life, and also what God has planned in terms of the learning that she would like me to do. And so this week has been quite an education on so many levels. I've been privileged to be a chaplain to the queue. I must explain that queuing, forming a line, is a very British thing to do, and we are experts at it. And if Nobel Prizes were given for it, we would win the Nobel Prize every single year. As a result, the archbishops got together to organize a multi-faith response to the queues, which are now lasting 13, 14, 15 hours, people sleeping overnight to see Our late Majesty lying in state. And I joined this concerted team effort that ran from Wednesday to it's running till this evening, actually. And I've had 3 shifts over 3 days of just standing and being with people as they experience the queue, go in and come out of the other side. The first day I was outside of the exit from the line in state, so right in Parliament Square, and I was absolutely struck by the wave of emotion and the surprise to which Lucy alluded, that people felt that they were so struck by their own reaction. And one of the things that came out of that was that they were also saying that this grief was an amplifier. It's amplified the other experiences of loss that they have faced over the past few years. And I said to Lucy that I feel, and I felt at the time, that there's also something about the grief of the pandemic, that some people haven't been allowed to grieve, and suddenly they're being given permission to grieve because Her Majesty has moved on and gone home. And I think that that is a really fascinating situation in which we find ourselves, because it's grief amplified and it's grief undenied. And that is something that's perhaps not very British, with our stiff upper lip, to let ourselves feel this weight and this extraordinarily strong emotion. The last part of my chaplaincy, I was privileged enough to be with the queue of people who have complex needs. So it was called the accessible queue. So it was for people who had any form of accessibility need. That could be a physical disability or a hidden disability. And they were placed slightly closer to the entrance, to the lying in state, and were given a different sort of queuing and ticketing system to ensure that they were not in any way put in distress or discomfort for too long, given the complex needs that they were bearing and traveling with. This was an entirely different experience. And it's fair to say that sometimes I think I can outrun God, and God just turns up right in front of my face. And in this situation, what I found was a real sense of anger that the provisions made for those without accessibility needs did not match the provision for those that have complex needs and for whom the process of traveling is so much more difficult. And they have planned and come from all over the country. And it was a very difficult situation. I spent most of the afternoon with the people themselves and also with the Chief Inspector of the London Metropolitan Police, trying to ensure that there was a sense of order and that the right information was being passed to these individuals and families who had made what I realized was a pilgrimage. They had made a pilgrimage to London. They had made a pilgrimage to see our late Queen, and they were determined to ensure that their experience was not in any way disrupted. And it was, because of poor planning, miscommunication, and a real lack of coordination. So I got really, really angry. I was really, really angry. In fact, I was so angry, I burst into tears, which is my version of turning to the Incredible Hulk. And so by the time I got back to Lambeth Palace, I was so incandescent with rage. I just absolutely stated what was going on the ground to the bishop, to the archbishops actually. And I said something needs to be done about this and needs to be done now, because this is totally unacceptable for the people there. And for me, that whole process was that grief does not give us an excuse to forget about our commitment to social justice. So whether we're grieving individually or collectively, that the call to a more equitable and more inclusive world is still there. It's not paused because we are grieving. And I was so convinced that I knew why I was being called to that place, and realized that I had no idea why I was being called to that place, and that the lessons are only coming to me now. And because we were chaplains, we were not allowed to join the queue or make our own, pay our own respects to the Queen. And I was saying to a family who'd come down from Yorkshire, and I said to them, actually, you're going to have to pay our respects for us on our behalf, because we are on the pavement, and so you can go in. And she said to me, they also serve who only stand and wait. Ooh. And I felt so moved that somebody was quoting Milton to me. And I thought, and right back at you, that this queue is no different. These people are no different. And all the provisions made for the other queue that were not made for this queue should have been there. And I have to say, I've been changed. It has been one of the most important and valuable things I've ever done. And I think it has made me realize that God is in the here and now, as well as the yesterday, as well as the tomorrow. And that God is constantly, I say this all the time, but I think God is constantly waiting for us to respond to the call to act in love and for love and by love. And so it's been extraordinary for me to see what that looks like in this context. And if I could answer the question that Peter posed about what does ministry look like in mourning, I think it's unwrapping. It's an unwrapping of the mystery of God, and it's unwrapping of people's experience, because they suddenly realize that, oh my goodness, I'm not just grieving for the Queen. You know, as one woman said, my father died last year in the pandemic, and I realized that I'm crying for him as well as for her. So the mystery and the reality of the pain and sorrow that people are experiencing is what we are unwrapping by the grace of God.
Thank you all for sharing from your experiences this week. We have a chance now to take your questions. You can send them in using the live chat function on YouTube, the comments function on Facebook. You can email me, pthompson@stbarts.org, pthompson@stbarts.org. And if you're here in person at St. Bart's getting ready for our big celebration at 11 and watching the forum, Excel Buguma is in the Great Hall, and she has question cards for you, and you can fill those out, and those questions will get to me. But before we get to your questions, I'll turn to my colleagues, and Dean first, if you have a question or comment to share.
Well, I'm going to defer to my colleague to my left here. So she gets, I want everybody to get a chance to get in here.
Maybe I'll turn this. Thank you so much. We all live here in New York City, but I've actually been across the church the last few days. And Peter's right that so many of us are talking about the death of Her Majesty. So many of us are talking about what this means for the Episcopal Church, the Anglican Communion, because of course she was the head of the church. So it's really wonderful to be able to come from all of that. I flew in last night to come from all of that and now to be right here with you. One of the questions that I heard and that I've pondered for myself, and that seems appropriate to pose with you, is a question about social justice. That St. James Piccadilly has such a strong commitment to justice. I perused your website and been inspired. I'm hearing you now. And there is, of course, this tension that many of us are sitting with, especially here in the States, but I think all over the world and kind of the Anglican world, if you will. And that's the question of, on the one hand, the admiration for the Queen, but also the reality that the monarchy, the British monarchy, has been responsible for such great injustices, and that empire itself, colonialism itself has often not been a force for peace and calm and the very things that everyone so admires about the Queen. So I just wonder, many of us are wondering, how do you hold that? How do you hold the reality that she was a complex person, that the monarchy is a complex institution, and that empire is real, and that there are many people around the globe who are experiencing this moment, not necessarily with admiration or grief, but actually with a sense of, once again, we are being told that we should be lauding someone who was also responsible for actions and a culture that have caused pain. So how do you sit with that?
I'm just wondering, Ayla, do you want to comment on that? Perhaps I can.
I'd love to. Yeah, sure. And first and foremost, thank you so much for raising this with such clarity, because it is such a core concern, not only for those who are asking those questions, but for each and every one of us. And not only in the Church of England and not only in the UK, but globally. And so I'm very glad. Thank you. One thing that is absolutely clear is that on a person by person level, pastorally, there is and has been and will be a huge range of perspectives. And I hope it's right when I say that each and every one of us, as the clergy and staff here at St. James's, are doing our best in our services, as well as in our general welcome to everyone in the building, and out in our parish, to be able to allow space and to be able to allow a genuine freedom and openness and listening, so that people who are deeply concerned in a way which is highly articulate and which comes from a place of deep injustice and all that is associated with that, to be able to really speak that and to say that and to inhabit that. I'm really sorry, there's a siren in the background. I hope that's not too distracting. There we go. Being right in the heart of London, that's how it is sometimes.
We weren't sure if it was your sirens or ours.
Exactly. And in particular, we have an extraordinary program supporting people who are encountering what is often called the hostile environment of the UK Home Office, those who are challenged by the lived experiences of being asylum seekers and refugees, and being able to offer a deep, genuine, and sincere support to them and to all members of our community, regardless of where they're from or what their experience is, has really been at the core of the way that we've been considering not only how to respond in this moment to what we could say is a kind of dominant narrative, which does contain some assumptions about how people are grieving, what people are thinking, who those people are, and to be able to say, no, this is nuanced, and this is today as well as historical, and those legacies of imperial power and the reality of the horror of racism and the way that it continues to be tragically lived out and encountered here is something that needs to be incorporated into this narrative with great care. And one more tiny thing, which is a story that some of you may be aware of. There was a young man called Chris Kaba who very tragically recently died. He was killed by a member of the London Metropolitan Police. And there was a protest, another one, for him and for justice for him and his family just yesterday. And so we're also doing our best in any way we can here at St. James's and with our community to be in solidarity with that struggle and to pray for him and for his family as well. And this is really on our hearts and minds. So I'm so glad you raised it. Thank you.
And all I would say by way perhaps of addition is to say that I think that some people use monarchy as a bit of a diversion from, or a kind of, it's a way of avoiding, because of all the kind of ceremonial around it. It's a way of avoiding the truths that lie at the heart of how we actually are organising our society and the injustices and the inequalities that are just evident there. So I think one of our roles is to try to narrate theologically monarchy and God's rule, God's kingdom, in a way that exposes truth rather than allows us to use it as a diversion. So that there's I mean, it's not a different point. It's a slightly nuanced point, but I think particularly as a white majority church, and I'm speaking as a white, church rector, that's one of the ways that I feel I can make a contribution to this, to the promotion of social justice, which is not to allow myself to use monarchy as this kind of rather, I mean, it's the Paddington Bear thing, there's lots of marmalade sandwiches and Paddington Bears being left because of the Platinum Jubilee. There was a sketch that the Queen kind of took part in. That's all very well, but if that's allowed to become the dominant narrative, then that's utterly diversionary from the reality of how we're organizing ourselves as a society. So I've used this phrase that we don't despise one another's tears, that there are some people personally feeling very bereft about this event. On a personal level, we will not despise those tears. At the same time, this could be an exposing moment rather than a closing down moment, but it matters how those of us who speak in public speak about it, because it could be the latter rather than the former.
I think I'll just add to that by saying, Lucy's the historian, not me, but I think that the best history is co-written with multiple voices and multiple participants in it. And what we have with the British royal family is sometimes quite a limited history. And I say that having been appointed to Her Majesty to a ceremonial role at Westminster Abbey, where I served before I came to St. James's Piccadilly. So I am a big fan of Her Majesty, and I feel that actually part of my chaplaincy this week has been a duty to her. At the same time, I recognise that as somebody of West African heritage, whose mother actually waved to the Queen as she did her Commonwealth tour following her coronation, that it is complex and also filled with potential. There is the potential to rewrite and reclaim. There is the potential to start creative conversations while still holding on to the truth. The Royal African Company of London was established by the royal family, led by the Duke of York, who was the brother of Charles II, and became one of the largest companies that facilitated the trading of people across the Atlantic. Now, that is firmly at the door and in the history of the royal family. At the same time, the modern legacy of the Commonwealth is a force for good potentially, is a force to open up conversations about social justice, potentially. We know that there are communities across the Commonwealth that are not allowed to live as they were born, that are not allowed to live in their own God-given identity. The Commonwealth should be the vehicle to enable us to have those kinds of conversations, to filter through the Anglican Communion, to create true social equity. Those things must exist. We must be able to talk about history and also talk about the liberative potential of history for people today. And I think if we ignore one, we do a disservice to the other.
It's interesting how monarchy, sometimes a political office, becomes it's sort of a place where all kinds of projection ends up. We participate in empire here through corporations. We participate in kind of colonialism in a variety of different settings, and monarchy is one of those, but there are a number of others. It strikes me, and moments like this are both opportunities and perhaps a little bit fraught, especially for those of us who are holding the hands of those who are grieving, along with those who are angry, and those who are processing all of it.
Meredith, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Just delighted to have you with us. And it's so interesting to hear where each of you was at the moment where you received this this news. It's quite striking that two of you were in church and one of you was discussing a painting commissioned by Charles I for Charles II at the moment of the accession of Charles III. But nevertheless, I was interested in what you were talking about in regard to the grief and the grief amplified and the expression of emotion that is happening in your space, and that you're allowing this to be in what is, I guess, a traditionally un-British way of letting the stiff upper lip shiver a bit. We had a visit from the Bishop of London last spring, who was here in New York for to talk to our bishop and made other visits. And she was talking about her own interest in mental health and the church as a place, in her words, where it's to provide a space where it's okay to not be okay. And I don't think the British people have a monopoly on stiff upper lipness at all, and we have that same challenge here at St. Bart's. And one of the challenges I'm wondering about for you as you are in this moment, but also in the weeks and months ahead, is continuing to provide that space for people to not be okay. We're about to start our own grief support group at the end of September here, and to allow people to feel their feelings, to be where they are, to come as they are, and how you might see St. James's operating in that way.
Can I just make a brief comment about that? I mean, one of the things that started here 35 years ago was that there's a shepherd's hut. It used to be a caravan that is in the grounds of the church, and it's open all the time that the church is open for people to come and have 1 hour's free therapy. And the people who staff that are third-year students on a therapeutic course. So it's their placement, they're there for 18 months. Because there's enough, the partnership works sufficiently so that it's able to be open for, from kind of 9 o'clock in the morning until 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And it's genuinely dropping in, people drop in, and the timetable of it is kept 60% free, so that there are some people who have regular, they have 5 or 6 sessions, but for most of the time it's simply there, and there is a counsellor, a trained counsellor, just sitting there all day waiting to see if anyone wants to come and talk. And that's a really long-standing project of the church, and it's been very well used. It tripled during the pandemic. They went on to the phones in the pandemic, and that's now. So there's that, and it's important that it's not the church. It's important that it's not a church building. It's next to the church. So it's kind of got vibes of the church, but it's absolutely not Christian or trying to tell people that there is a Christian answer to any of the things that they bring. So I think that kind of, again, we take our cue from that. One of my colleagues used to say that the most effective thing that you can do in a church is be like those marketing devices where they say, if you like this, then you'll probably like that. So sometimes in church, very small signifiers tell people that it's okay not to be okay. And sometimes it is just saying that out loud, but the rhetoric has to match the action. So if you say that all the time, and then actually everyone is relentlessly cheerful and action oriented and all, focused on this, that's not gonna, people will of course see the gap. And it's a constant challenge to keep that gap, I think, as small as possible, so that it genuinely is okay not to be okay in church. And I think church culture, we have a lot to learn about how to make that more explicit. That's how I would start to answer that question.
Yeah, building on that, if I can, this is a place where I have arrived recently. My first day was on St. James's Day on the 24th of July. And what I knew before by reputation and what I'm beginning to deeply get to know now as best I can is that this is a place where authentic vulnerability is not just welcomed or even held. It's just true. And there's a simplicity of the quality of that truth that unites every human being in a shared experience of the complexity and the simplicity of being alive that underpins what this congregation is like, and the kind of offer that, as best we can, we're trying to make as human beings in the world. The stiff upper lip thing, you can probably tell from my accent that I'm not British. So I'm from Vancouver in Canada, so I have no stiff upper lip at all. But I've lived in the UK for 20 years, so I'm starting to get to know the upper lips of others, if you like. And there is something so profound, I think, in what you're pointing out regarding the priority and the increasing priority of mental health. And in the widest sense, attending to people's well-being is something that the church, because we're all made in the image of God, cannot help but do. And it's when in one way or another we become defensive or anxious, or we try to mask that or make expectations about how people should be in any given moment, especially in a moment like what we're experiencing with the death of the Queen. I don't know, the first principles of Christianity are surely grounded in a love that is first and foremost vulnerable. So I'm glad that you raised that.
I think there is something incredibly grounding in having a rhythm of prayer that includes the Eucharistic table. I'm a Benedictine, so I'd be all over the place if I didn't pray. I mean, some would argue I'm all over the place now, but that's a different conversation. I think that the reality of what we're trying to present is that the table offers a constant and consistent invitation, regardless of where you are, and where you are in body and where you are in mind. And I think if we can labor that point constantly, which we try to do in our Eucharistic prayer, which is much more based on the Iona community, is that and the invitation, I should say, to the table, not so much Eucharistic prayer, but is that what we're saying is that you can bring it to this table and you will still be invited and your place is still saved because of an eternal love. And therefore, the fact that we are not quite where we want to be mentally, are completely run ragged, are feeling the incredible arresting experience of this historic moment, doesn't affect your place at the table. It doesn't affect the calling that is on your head, because God knows you intimately and personally. And so I feel very reassured that actually just by being, as Ayla would say, just by being church, just by doing what we're doing, what we're called to do every Sunday in our weekday services, we're offering a place for people to be and to come as they are. And that is a real gift that I hope we can offer constantly throughout the year, not just at this moment in time. The other thing, I think, to Lucy's point, is that we're all very busy as clergy, and I think that sometimes we can say it's okay not to be okay, but then we never show it. Yeah. So we are totally fine all the time, just icy smooth and serene. And people say, well, it's all right for you to say that. You've never been where I am. You've never you could never understand. And I think, of course, there's a fine line between being the shepherd and the professional clergy that we are, and also being able to share that actually I do understand. I have had this challenge and I do get it, even though I don't show it every day. So I think there's a call for us to be vulnerable as well as leaders, not just for us to hold people in our shepherding calling.
So unfortunately, the four of us have to go downstairs and get ready for church. But we are so appreciative to each of you, Mariana, Ayla, Lucy, for spending this time with us, in what I know is a very, very busy and complicated, complex week. Dean, do you have any final words you want to share?
Just that we're so grateful to share even just a little bit in the way you are serving your community, and I know that it's an enormous thing for a church to be open long hours, and for the clergy to be available and to be repositories for grief and for all of the emotions that are a part of it. And we just give such thanks for your work and for your ministry. Thanks for sharing it today.
Thank you. We really look forward to meeting you all in person. That would be wonderful for us.
Likewise. And thank you all for watching. We hope you'll stick around and join us for worship at 11 a.m., whether you're already here in person or at St. Bart's, or whether you're watching us online. And we hope you'll be back for the forum next week. Have a great morning, all.